The following programming may contain, but is not limited to, moderate profanity, regular profanity, loud noises, mic squeaks, headstands, dance moves, verbal tics, deer tics, obscenely long-winded chit-chat, obscenely long-winded rock and roll, and strange indie slang. Listeners are encouraged to utilize their own discernment to draw their own conclusions. Oh, and take discretion.
Are you listening? The fact of the matter is, I don't think you're listening to me at all, and that's of great concern.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to CKXU Friday nights. This is a subject on CKXU. I'm your host, Ben Christensen, and joining me, as usual, in studio, my co-host, Mr. Thomas Stone.
Good evening, Wellsbridge, as usual.
Glad to be back on the air after a few months of unexpected hiatus, in which we've taken the time to create a new programming schedule to bring you new and more controversial topics of discussion that... For those of you who are new to the show, that's what this program is all about. We're all about talking and discussing subject matter that isn't normally discussed, that some might find semi-taboo. But we want to talk about these things and promote discussion about these topics. So,
well, it's taboo, but also we're trying to shed a different light on topics that, in general, don't receive enough conversation.
Absolutely. And for those of you new to the show, this is a listener interactive program, so if you've got something to say during the course of our discussion, you are more than welcome to do so by calling our studio line at 403-329-5189. That is the number to call for that. And that'll put you on air with myself and my co-host to chat a little bit about the topic of discussion for the week. Again, that number, 403-329-5189. And without further ado, we also, before we proceed here, want to remind you that you can check us out on Twitter at the subject CKXU or by using hashtag #MoreThanTalkRadio. And on that note, we move on to our regular weekly segment of What Happened. And for those of you new to the program, this is a segment of the show where we take unusual news stories of the week and we talk a little bit about them and give our criticisms or praises to the lunacy that is our world. And the first story of the week, a Pennsylvania man violently assaulted his brother, and is now facing assault charges after attacking his brother over him not sharing his Big Macs. Apparently his brother had come home and had eaten 3 McDonald's Big Macs. And apparently he just wasn't in the mood to share because he ate all 3. And I guess when his brother found out, he wasn't too happy about it. Took to beating the crap out of his brother over it and demanding that he share one of his Big Macs.
Sadly, this is actually not the first time I've heard of such stories, and I just think that, if you're going to make that much of a big deal out of a burger, you obviously are very easily amused, and you're way too easily well, I wouldn't say
Frustrated.
Well, yeah, way too easily frustrated. That's the best way of putting it.
Well, I mean, if you get pissed off over a $3.99 cheeseburger, I hate to say it, but I think you got some issues that are not resolved here, and perhaps it's time to seek help. I mean, what's going to happen to this guy when he gets locked up in jail for assaulting his brother and it's burger night, and he doesn't get to eat everyone else's burgers?
Well, yes, I this basically coincides with our topic of this week, which is on addiction. So we figured this one was like, okay, well, if people are assaulting each other over burgers, I think there's an addiction component involved here.
Well, I hate to say it, but it sounds like he really had a beef with his brother.
That's one way of putting it. Oh, boy.
And I really don't know what else you can say other than this is absolute lunacy. The fact that people are resorting to beating each other up over a burger tells me that either we're all really hungry or McDonald's is just really damn good.
Well, it's interesting. I haven't heard of this. I mean, it's possible it's happened, but I haven't heard of it out of Wendy's or Arby's. More violence seems to occur in a McD's these days than in a restaurant.
Well, this takes the cake for ludicrous, almost to the same extent as the crazy lady who called 911 to file a complaint with the police because McDonald's ran out of chicken nuggets.
Oh, yes, I saw that one.
And to me, I mean, if you're that upset about McDonald's food, it's no secret, folks. If you're not happy with the McDonald's you're at, there's one just right down the block you can go to and probably will be able to serve your needs.
Well, or if you don't like, if you're that addicted to fast food, I highly advise you learn how to cook just the simplest of things and go out and buy your own food and cook it. That way, the only person you can disappoint is yourself.
Well, this guy, the picture of this individual, we'll post the article to our Twitter feed here. But this guy looks like he was pretty angry about it. He looks like a pretty angry fella in general, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there's some other issues at work here that we're not apprised to.
Very potentially, but you know what? In future, I recommend if you instead of the Big Mac, get the double quarter pounder. It's much more filling. Comes with two patties, 2 slices of cheese. You won't be disappointed.
And I have to do everything I can just avoid laughing my butt off here.
Well, that's satisfactory, I suppose. If you have to restrain yourself from laughing, I'm sure our listeners are doing the same. And with that note, we move on to part 2, or story number 2 this week's What Happened. We're all familiar with the little yellow minion characters that we've all come to love and recognize and adore. In this news segment, a 24-year-old New York man was arrested after inspectors for the U.S. Postal Service got their hands on 5 packages filled with cocaine valued at $225,000, all headed to the suspect, and at least one of the packages made to look like it was filled with birthday gifts, including a stuffed toy of the minion characters, apparently was filled with cocaine.
Yeah, well, going once again on the topic of addictions. This is a glaring example of people who are desperate to keep the trafficking of a certain drug under wraps and do it creatively. That just tells me there's a lot of desperate people out there that will resort to almost anything to keep their underground market going.
Whatever happened to the good old days when you could just stick a balloon up the old poop chute and walk through customs that way? I mean, people are getting so creative now in how they try to smuggle dope into the country. I'm awestruck that we don't have a higher rate of incarceration for drug possession and trafficking.
Well, incarceration for drug possession is a whole different topic, but yeah, well, that's. There's so many things I could say on this. There's not enough time on the air.
Well, I guess the minions were serving their master.
Yeah.
The little yellow guys did what they were told.
Yeah, well, again, this just screams. I admit it's creative, but it's like, wow. I mean,
Well, I guess it's a good thing little Sally didn't get this as a birthday present, because I'm sure she would have found the presence of the toy to be very intoxicating.
well, you are the king of the puns, it seems.
I have lots of these jokes. I'll just leave it at that. But to me, I mean, the very fact that people are getting this creative on bringing contraband into the country only suggests to me that perhaps the parameters for controlled substances is just a little bit too strict. I mean, we're going to be talking about addictions here, and we have some very liberal views on the topic. But to me, the fact that people have to get this creative, resorting to smuggling drugs and children's toys, I mean, I've seen a lot of creative ways to bring drugs into the country, but this is a new one. Children's toys.
Yeah, well, let's say we'll be discussing it later in the show, but this to me is just another byproduct of the continuous war on drugs, in my opinion. You know, if we decriminalized it and offered treatment, chances are you wouldn't see this kind of silly things going on. But so we'll be talking about that aspect later on.
Absolutely. I guess it comes to mind, if you were to slice one of these cocaine-carrying minions in half, would you have a filet mignon?
I have no comment on that. Oh, boy.
And the article here goes on, making all kinds of wisecracks as well. But it doesn't really come as any surprise. The minions have become quite popular in the masses, and there seems to be a lot of hype around them. And so, I mean, people's love affair with these lovable little creatures, they seem to be wreaking havoc for some unexplained reason. Everything from somehow being associated with Twinkies and running the Twinkie business out of business. That's what they've been accused of. Along with that, there was a giant inflatable minion that blew over and apparently caused hours worth of traffic delays in Ireland.
Yeah, I look at this picture, and as much as I probably would be frustrated with the traffic jam, I think that'd be actually quite hilarious to see a big minion lying in the street. It'd be kind of funny.
Well, we certainly talk about irony. The minions are a menace to evildoers, and apparently the people in Ireland were doing some pretty evil stuff driving to work that day because they were menaced by a gigantic one.
Yeah.
As I said, much joke opportunity here, but we'll try and keep this we'll try and keep the jokes to a minimum here. On that note, we're going to take a little break here, tell you about some of the other great programming and some of our great sponsors here at CKXU. And when we get back, this week's subject on addictions. So please stay tuned, and we'll be with you shortly.
Welcome to the soundtrack of your weekend. 1 hour of past, present, and future electronic music. Tune in bi-weekly, Fridays from 9 till 10 p.m. Lights out with DJ Zero Lux.
Get your CKXU Friends card for great deals and discounts at places around Lethbridge, such as...
Receive a 15% discount after 5 p.m. from Monday through Thursday at Coco Pazzo, located at 1264 3rd Avenue South. Coco's is the pinnacle expression of an Italian dining experience known as casual fine. casual room with fine dining.
Some restrictions may apply. For more details, visit ckxu.com.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to The Subject here on 88.3 CKXU. I'm your host, Ben Christensen. With me in studio, my co-host, Mr. Thomas Stone.
Good evening.
This week, we are talking about addictions. And
I was just going to say that. That's quite... it's a broad topic in of itself.
well, I found myself getting hooked on the topic.
Oh my gosh, you and the puns.
But seriously, it's an addictive subject. There's lots to discuss.
Yes, there is. I get addicted to... I personally get addicted to controversial conversations, such as this one, probably.
No doubt. And, in a nutshell, addictions are not... when we hear the word addictions, we think drugs, alcohol, substance abuse, that type of behavior. But there's so much more to the topic than just simply substance abuse. There's such a small fish in the broader spectrum of the category of addictions.
Well, I sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that, in our society, whenever you hear of somebody having an addiction problem, it's like the first thing you're thinking is, well, okay, are they drinking their face off? Are they getting hooked? Are they doping themselves? I mean, it's the problem with that? Society has stigmatized that, just like mental illness and many other things. And I think addiction itself is it's been talked about in the wrong ways. And people are, there are certain, I don't think addiction can be an entirely negative thing all around per se. It really depends. But I just think that our society has this stigmatized view that, oh, well, addiction period is just evil, wrong, disgusting, it's not socially acceptable, things like that. I think that conversation needs to change.
Definitely. And as I was saying, addictions is so much more than just substance abuse or being hooked on a substance of some form. By definition, addiction is defined as a state characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli, despite adverse consequences. To simplify that definition a little bit, what that means is something that makes you feel good or something that rewards you with a positive outcome it gives you a thrill, it gives you a sense of enjoyment for a brief period of time. And in many cases, we get so hooked on this feeling of satisfaction that we get from whatever that stimuli is, that we begin to overlook the consequences that may result from that stimuli. For example, gambling addictions is a big one. People who will spend hours upon hours at a casino dropping money on the table, all for that moment or a couple of minutes worth of stimuli or thrill when they finally get a big payout.
No, I've personally met quite a few gambling addicts, and they don't seem to realize that they're going for that, one big high of winning big money at a table or a machine or whatever, but they don't really do the math because you're spending just for that one big win. The problem is, if you look at it logically, you just dumped all this money on that big win. Chances are that big win is only going to cover what you lost, and you're right back to square one. So I think that's the reason why, especially gambling addictions are probably one of the biggest talked about ones, which is good. It does need to be talked about, and I think that people don't realize it is, I would agree, it is nothing but destructive.
And it's not just destructive to the person individually, it's destructive to the family life, the home life. There's shopping addicts who they get therapeutic enjoyment out of making a retail purchase. And because they get such a thrill out of that, they become addicted to it, and they're constantly at the shopping mall spending money, racking up credit card bills, credit card debt. And this is an addictive behavior.
Yeah, I was just actually just thinking that we did a previous episode on consumerism, and I just occurred to me that we talked in there about big marketing companies that are pushing their products, and it's turned into a system of all about money. And I think that shopping addicts, I especially think shopping itself is partly driven by this consumeristic need that it's like, I need more stuff. I need stuff to make me happy. I just need more and more and more and more and more, and I don't even care about how much I'm draining the bank account in the process. I think there's that ties into the whole consumerism mentality.
Well, and to add to that, I mean, it's more than that. Even myself, coming from a background in sales, I found myself addicted to the thrill of closing a deal, to the point where it became a part of my life beyond just working, and it started to have an impact on my social life because I was constantly working because of that thrill that I sought to have, that couple moments of satisfaction and enjoyment of closing that big account or that big deal.
Yeah, see, that's where I would say, that's what I said before, that not all kind of addiction is negative per se. I mean, yes, that did have negative effects, I would agree, but I think that there is a way that you can still love the high of closing a deal without it impacting your private and social life. I think that's entirely possible. It requires some level of discipline.
And that ties into the behavioral aspect of addictions. Is somebody who is got that what psychiatrists would describe as an addictive personality, is somebody who is very easily susceptible to addictive behaviors. And that brings us into a whole other avenue of discussion, which is, is an addiction a behavioral aspect of life? Is it a mental illness? Is it a disease? Or is it all of the above?
I was just going to say that brings in the whole new question. I'm definitely not a medical expert. I'm not professing to be. However, from my own logical analysis of the issue, I personally think that addiction is a byproduct of mental illness. I'm not sure if I would agree with the categorization that addiction is a mental illness. I'm not really sure if I'd agree with that, but I mean, I'm only one person with one opinion.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people in the world of psychology would disagree with you on that aspect.
I know.
That addiction is, the definition of a mental illness is a mental dysfunction that impairs a person's behavior or emotional state. And if you analyze it by that definition, then an addiction of any kind really can be considered an issue of mental health, because people who are demonstrating an addictive behavior are looking for that thrill, for that high they get from that addiction that they have. And that particular high creates endorphins that are received and transmitted into the body from neuroreceptors. And those neuroreceptors that release the endorphins into the body create a change in the emotional state and also the mental state of the body. And so physically and mentally, yes, I believe that an addiction is an aspect, in some aspects, a mental illness, but not definitively a mental illness. There's, because of the behavioral aspect associated with it as well. Because while we can't control our mental functions as far as any disabilities that might occur, we do have the ability to control our behavioral aspect. And so I believe that there is some aspects of addictions being a mental illness, but also that there is a behavioral aspect which can be controlled as well.
Well, I don't have much to say on what you said, but I think I think if you get right down to the core of the issue, addiction really is a byproduct of something that you feel like you're missing. It's that desire to fill a void inside of you that you don't feel like you can fill with anything else, whether it be family, love, whatever. I think it can be said that every person who actually has a definite addiction, especially to harmful things, drugs, potentially liquor, smoking, whatever, right? They are, at the heart, there's a void in them that they are trying to fill, and those substances become literally their best friend.
It's what you're suggesting is that it becomes a replacement for aspects of human life.
Well, I mean, yeah, because, I mean, if you, for example, you get divorced, you're stressed over the breakup, any kind of breakup, really. That's just one example. A lot of spouses, they get a divorce, and then the first stop is a liquor store because it gives them that warm, fuzzy feeling on the inside that they feel like they can just let all the stresses melt away while they drink their face off.
And that brings us to the aspect of the high that is generated from behaviors associated with addiction. And I'm not just talking about the high you get when you use a narcotic substance. I'm talking about every single aspect of any kind of addiction, whether it be sex addiction, whether it be gambling addiction, whether you're addicted to listening to radio.
That too.
Sorry, subtle hint to our listeners.
Well, that's why I said that not all, addictions per se are necessarily a bad thing, because that's the reason why I said at the beginning that we have to change the conversation around this idea of addiction, because when society hears addiction, automatically you're thinking, okay, well, you're a crack addict, you're an alcoholic, or something like that. That's what they're thinking, and I think that image has to change.
Well, we've been naturally brainwashed to believe that an addiction can only be merited from some kind of a substance use, but there's as I said, there's so many more aspects to it. There is the behavioral aspect, there's a mental aspect, there's the physical aspect of addictions, and addictions is not strictly limited to substance abuses. A person can be addicted to habitual use of hobbies or other activities that create the same kind of stimuli that you get when you are doing, if you are an addict to alcohol or drugs, you get that high and that thrill and that enjoyment out of being high. The same thing occurs when a person gets addicted to the thrill and enjoyment they receive from a specific activity. Sexual activity is definitely one. There's a lot of people out there who are addicted to sex because of the physical sensations they receive and because of the high they get from that. There's people who are addicted to gambling because of the stigma or the thrill and the stimulus they get from winning money, not realizing, of course, that to win that, $10,000 or $15,000 payout that they got, they might have blown through $20,000 to get there, and they don't consider that as a bad thing because they're so hooked on the thrill of winning that one-time big payout, they forget to think about how much they spent before they had to get to that point. The same with sex addictions, the same with gambling addictions. Any addiction comes with a consequence, and that consequence could be financial, could be emotional, could be physical. People need to stop thinking that addiction is just strictly something related to substance abuses, because there is a broader spectrum related to addictions beyond substance.
Well, that's why I was saying that not all addictions per se are a negative thing. I wouldn't consider sex addiction to be problematic because people always say, well, people say that, oh, well, marriages have been destroyed by sex addiction. I think, personally, if you want to love it up that much, go ahead. I mean, to me, I don't really see that as problematic per se. I would say that addiction is gosh, I already said this before, but essentially what you're looking for is it's that compulsive need for a certain high or something, which, like, in your the thrill that you get, being around super hot, loud cars, you can be addicted to the thrill of speed or just being around loud engines. That there's nothing wrong with that per se. That's an addiction. It's not going to be harmful. And that's what I'm trying to say.
I would disagree with you that having a speed addiction isn't harmful, because if you're addicted to driving at high speeds, there is that consequence you're overlooking of what happens if I cause an accident because I'm going too fast.
Well, okay, I should clarify. I'm not speed is a whole different issue. I'm talking about just the high a lot of car nuts get around when they're around really hot cars. Like somebody, if you're just around a Lamborghini and you're just addicted to that growling sound of the engine, that technically you want that sound. You are addicted, but that's not a negative addiction. It doesn't have any bad repercussions unless you're sticking your ear right next to it and blasting your ears out, but it's not going to have any detrimental health effects.
Unless, of course, you're sleeping with your wife at 3:30 in the morning and you insist on playing a Lamborghini revving, in which case there would be some repercussions, but, I mean, that would be some pretty serious addiction problems, in which case we would recommend that somebody seek therapy or some kind of help to mitigate that a little bit. On that note, we've reached the half point of our program. For our regular lessons, for the regular listeners on the program, you know that we have our halftime musical selection. This week we're bringing you a local artist here from Lethbridge. A shout out to Miss Dee Dee Da. And this week we have chosen an entertainer from the local Club Dee Dee, formerly Boudoir. And Miss Dee Dee Da. It's a bit of a difficult name to pronounce. This comes from her recently released album, Double D's, and a song here that was put forward by Miss Da called Monique's on Fourth. So without further ado, we bring you Dee Dee Da and Monique's on Fourth. Enjoy, and we'll be back with you in just a couple minutes.
It doesn't matter if you're a size 2 or a size 222. If you live in this dusty town and you gotta shop, who am I kidding? Fat bitches, get out! Monique's on Fourth. You've heard of it? Maybe. Monique's on Fourth. It's on Fourth. Monique's on Fourth. It's right next door to Bordello on Fourth. Let's go! They have shoes, ruffles, lace, brassieres. I bought some puffed sleeves for my tank top. I bought some zippers for my long sleeved shoes. My ass is made of silver. It looks better in those jeans. Come on, put it on me, Monique. I did too much cocaine. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Monique's on Fourth. I like to go there with my friends, if I had any. No one likes to go there with me, so I go shopping by myself. And I say, give me those clothes. And then they put them on me, and they're made of leopard skin, you know. I Angelica Houston. I like to wear the fringy bits. I hate it there, but I go. Come on, put it on me, Monique. Monique's on fourth. Monique's on fourth. You know, everybody's shopping at Monique's on fourth, except you. Monique's on fourth. Monique's on fourth. You know that everybody's dropping hints at Monique's on fourth. The sales girls are beautiful. They wear their hair in a beehive. I try to look like them. I look better. Monique's on fourth. Shopping at Monique's, I like to put on clothes. I wear my tights, wear my panties, and put on some hose. I like to dance there. They tell me to leave. I say, get a load of these McGuppies. And then they put on puff sleeves. Monique's on fourth. Who's that?
Monique's on fourth.
Stop talking.
Everybody's shopping at
Monique's on fourth. Monique's on fourth. La la.
Monique's on fourth.
Monique's on fourth.
Everybody's shopping
Don't tell me what to
Monique's
do.
on fourth. Dee Dush.
This groove makes me horny. Put it in. Monique's on fourth. 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 It's a girl, Dee Dee. Dee Dee da da da. And I'm here to tell you one thing. Come on, Princess Edward. Let's take these folks shopping at Monique's on 4th. Monique's on 4th. I'm shopping there. At Monique's on 4th. I'm throbbing there. At Monique's on 4th. I'm dropping hair. At Monique's on 4th. I'm everywhere. At Monique's on 4th. Regard mes globes, dans cette robe. Regard mes fesses, dans cette dress. Regard my cock in this frock. Danse. Monique's on 4th. 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 Monique's on 4th.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Subject on 88.3 CKXU FM. I'm your host, Ben Christensen, and my co-host joining me in studio, Mr. Thomas Stone. Just a few announcements, a few events coming up here that we'd like to share with you. First off is the 5th annual Love and Records presented by CKXU 88.3, which is a music fest and a records fair. Free event going down at Galt Gardens on September 12th of this year. So make sure you come on out because we're going to be featuring a very awesome special guest. Many of you might remember from your childhood, Mr. Fred Penner will be there this year at the 5th annual Love and Records. So make sure you put that into your calendar for September 12th. We'll see you there. And on that note, let's move on with the program. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about addictions and some of the behaviors and other aspects of addiction that aren't normally associated with addiction. Now we're going to move into more of what causes addictive behaviors, what triggers addictive behaviors, and why do people resort or engage into addictions? What is it about addictions that draws us in, that gets us hooked, that we just have to have that constant stimuli in our life? I guess to address that, one of the first things in our research article, psychiatric studies show that there's a greater likelihood, I believe it was 70%, of victims of trauma and stress are more likely to have some form of addiction in their life.
Yeah, I mean, I found this, I guess I should say, somewhat surprising, but not really. I've talked to many people who have past trauma issues, and many people who are under currently a lot of stress. And I think that's very true. I think if you look at the way our economy has gone the last roughly 10 years or so, didn't used to be near as many liquor stores around. Now it's like they're a dime a dozen. And I think it could be said over the last same 10-year span, there's been a greater increase in, really severe car accidents and, let's see, divorce, my gosh, tongue twister, divorce, my gosh. There's, there's so many...
Divorce is when you get when she takes half and you keep the Porsche.
Thank you for that. But yeah, like there's car accidents. I name that just because it's like practically a daily event, but it has wide-reaching effects. There's family issues. I mean, there's so many things that envelop family issues.
Well, when it comes to trauma, I guess we want to analyze that a little bit. What do we define as trauma? And trauma isn't necessarily just a major event like a car accident or something unexpected that happens so quickly that it can be other events in your life. Like you become essentially a trauma is any event in your lifetime where you have somehow been a victim of that incident would, I guess, in a way define trauma, because that's where the root of the word trauma, that's where that comes from, is you're left in a state where you are traumatized by that event. And a part of trauma is coping with that trauma, because a great example is war veterans who go overseas, fight for our country, see horrendous things while they're there, and then they come back and they begin having flashbacks and violent nightmares and all manner of post-traumatic stress from the things they saw and the things they did. And it's unfortunate, but a lot of veterans resort to alcohol and drug abuse to help cope with those traumas that they've experienced, because they don't know how else to deal with them. And so they resort to these addictions to help cope with that trauma and the stress related to what they've seen and experienced.
And I think that just points to the fact that we, as I said before, we need to change the conversation around addiction, period. Because instead of, our society seems to be so focused on trying to remove the substance rather than trying to treat the underlying issue of the addiction itself. Because there's, I can't say 100% of cases, but probably pretty close. When it comes to addiction issues, there's always some underlying other problem that they're resorting to these behaviors to try to fix. And so if we, instead of trying to say, well, you need to stop drinking so much, or you need to stop, taking dope or whatever it might be, you need to ask that person, what is the issue that is triggering the compulsive behavior in the first place?
And I think that's where a lot of addictive behaviors may form, is from that trauma that we experience in our lifetime. And those traumatic events, because we're afraid to open up and to talk about them and to free ourselves from the fear we experience with those experiences, I think that a lot of us resort to these addictive behaviors to help bury the emotional hardship that we're experiencing from those events. And most people would sooner resort to some form of an addictive coping mechanism, be it drugs, alcohol, retail therapy, shopping, whatever it is. A lot of people would much rather resort to the easy road, which is to have that high so that you can just try and numb or kill the pain of that trauma that you experienced, rather than addressing it. And I think that if people who are coping that way were just able to take get the help they need and to take a few minutes just to cope with that trauma, they could very easily overcome their addiction as well.
Well, and that's where I say, if you have family that seems to have an insistent need to always be going down to a street corner to get their dope or the liquor store, whatever it may be, instead of criticizing them for that action, you need to, yes, it's a harder road to take, but you need to sit down with them and get to the core issue, because they're just going to hate you for constantly being critical of their actions. And I think that's sort of what has led to a lot of the meltdown of families in the last decade or so. We're so focused on labeling the person, pointing the finger at them, saying, "Oh well, you need to quit consuming this substance," instead of trying to get to the core issue. And that is...
Well, that brings me back to one of our past episodes on mental health, where we were talking a little bit about how there's a stigma associated with it. People are afraid to confront their mental health issues, just like they're afraid to confront their emotional issues. And it's because society has stigmatized these types of things in a negative way. And when you see somebody and they ask you how you're doing, it's our natural instinct to want to just say, "Oh yeah, I'm doing fine," when really, deep down inside, we're not doing okay. And we're burying that emotion because that's just the natural norm that we're programmed to live and abide by. I said before, it's not the easiest thing to do. I mean, it's so much easier just to criticize the behavior, but it's not going to be the end of the world for you to sit down with your family member and get to the bottom of what's bothering them, because that's what it is. They're engaging in this behavior because something is bothering them, and they have no way of actually dealing with that issue. Yes, it's going to take some patience. It's going to be really hard, but that's what's ultimately going to keep families together in the end. And you may say, "Oh, well, I've tried to help this person. I've tried to help them, many times." That's okay. If you try to help them many times and they're still engaged in the behavior, then more needs to be done. You don't just give up on them or start criticizing them, because that's just going to contribute to it. That brings me to another point altogether, as because there's such a stigma attached to addiction, just like there's a stigma attached to mental health, we would rather shun the people who are plaguing us or somehow having an impact in our lives because of their addictions, rather than seeking to help them understand why they're going through this, why they're displaying this behavior or this addictive tendency to a specific hobby or substance, rather than addressing the core issue, which is why. We want to blast them and we want to say, "You're a terrible person because you're an addict." And that, folks, is the wrong way to approach these things. We're going to take another little break here, again, to tell you about some of the great programs and sponsors we have here at CKXU. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the stigma around addictions and how people can...
Well, the legal side of things.
...deal with addictions, as well as what are the legal repercussions of addictive behaviors and addictions in general. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment with the subject.
Join me, your host, The Egg White, on CKXU 88.3 FM, Friday, 11 a.m. See you there.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor?
Get your CKXU Friends card for great deals and discounts at places around Lethbridge, such as...
Receive a 10% discount at Drunken Sailor, located at 323 6th Street South. Purveyors of alternative clothing for adventurous mermaids and lost sailors on the prairies.
Some restrictions may apply. For more details, visit ckxu.com.
Welcome back to the subject here on 88.3 CKXU. I'm your host, Ben Christensen, and my co-host, Mr. Thomas Stone. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the behaviors and I guess the stigma and root causes of addiction. Now we're going to get into the legal side of things a little more. And the first question, obviously in the top of society's mind, is specifically with surrounding drug and substance addictions. Why is it that people who are addicted to these substances, why is it being criminalized, and why are addictive substances becoming such a burden on the criminal system?
Or the legal system, I guess you'd call it.
The legal system.
My sentiments on this, again, I think society has misdirected their frustration and anger. Everybody says, oh, well, these substances are harmful, and therefore this person needs to pay a price for having such a substance. And I'll look at that and go, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Yes, substances like cocaine, heroin, meth, I'd say the top three most dangerous street drugs. And I would agree, they do need to be controlled and limited. I would say tax dollars are fairly spent on controlling those substances. Now, are they fairly spent criminalizing people who have them? That's where I would say no. We need to focus on getting people off these substances into treatment, not making criminals.
Well, rather than criminalize the people who are supplying it and the people who are using substances to feed their addiction, we need to get to the root cause of the addiction. And in a lot of cases, it stems from social issues, broken family situations, trauma, as we mentioned earlier, stress, whether it be financial, emotional, and even mental health plays a role in people and their addictions. And as far as the criminalization of the substances themselves, definitely the wrong people are being targeted in this fight to try and suppress and stop the distribution of controlled substances. That said, people also need to understand. I have a friend who's an addictions counselor, and the one thing that she has repeatedly told me is that an addiction can consume a person to the point that to not have that high or that thrill, it literally drives them crazy. And they become so desperate for that fix, for that one hit, that they will resort to criminal behavior and victimizing others without any thought of the repercussions of those actions, because all they can focus on is that one high, that one-time fix that they get with that high.
But I guess that sort of brings in a second question, though. Yes, that person might resort to criminal behavior to, get that substance or to get that high, but I think we need to differentiate between making a criminal out of the criminal act or a criminal out of possession of the substance. I'm saying we need to criminalize people who commit criminal acts, and simply being in possession of a substance is, in my opinion, not a criminal act. That's not the part that we need to be legally worried about. It's the criminal act that results from use of the drug. That's what I'd like to get at.
And that's what I was kind of leading to, is that we always see in society with the behaviors of people who are addicts is the that they're victimizing innocent people. What we don't understand is that they have no sense of reality. They have no sense of emotion when thinking about the consequences related to the behaviors triggered from their addictions. They don't think about these things. All they can think about is dealing with that high, that fix that they get. And although I do not condone their behavior, we also cannot condemn these people for what they're doing, because these are people who have been in and out of the system because of their addiction time and time again. And it's obviously not working. They get in, they detox while they get back out on the street, and the first thing they're doing is looking for another fix. They learn nothing. They were not deterred from committing any crimes because all they can think about is that fix. What we need to do is implement a system that treats the behavior and gets to the root cause, which is probably more likely the stress or trauma of something specific that that person cannot cope with emotionally, mentally, even physically. If we can change the way we look at addictions and addictive behavior by addressing the core root causes instead of condemning people for the way they live their lives, I could tell you we would make mass amounts of progress in being able to help better facilitate care for people with addictions.
You know, I will say, I'm a filmmaker myself by trade. And some years back, I was trying to do a documentary around homelessness. Fortunately, never got off the ground. But in my efforts to try to make that documentary, I ended up talking to a lot of people on the street. That's like the best source for information, really. And, you know, the one thing that they told me that they just absolutely could not stand, and some of them were homeless by choice because they just had it to the teeth of criticism. People, their family is overly critical of their problems. They just couldn't stand the constant judgment that they were getting. And I think that that's a very valid criticism of the world. You know, we need to actually a better way of saying it is some love and compassion will go a long way. Like, seriously. Instead of, you know, if you're somebody who has never had these issues and you want to look down on people who have, I would encourage you to rethink your view on it, because the reason why we have such a terrible problem with especially underage teens abusing drugs and gang problems, a lot of it is just a lack of love and a lack of compassion. They resorted to criminal behavior because their family was nothing but critical, wanted to judge them for what they wanted to do with their life instead of being supportive and trying to understand their issues. And that goes a long way. The most powerful force on the planet has proven to be love.
And you know what? I have one final thought to add to it. Before we sit here and point the finger at others who have problems with addiction, who have problems with their behavior because of addiction, or problems because they can't cope with things emotionally, let's take a step back for a moment. Let's have a real harsh look at the reality of our own situation. Because everybody, every single human being in this world deals with some kind of addiction. It is not a behavior simply synonymous with a certain group of people or a certain niche market of people. It is all of us. We all have our addictions in life. And we all have a reason for that addiction, and that whether it's the thrill or the high we get, or maybe it's because we feel it's the only way to deter our minds from the emotional stress. Whatever the cause, we all have addictions in our life that control us. And until we can realize that addiction is not a choice, it's a way of life, it's a behavior, and it is something that each and every one of us is plagued with. Once we can finally come to that understanding, that's when society will begin to be able to successfully address and treat the problem. On that note, we've reached the end of our program, so just a few final points.
My closing thought on this, as Ben was just saying, I think the society is so hypocritical in of itself. We just want to point the finger at people, especially drug addicts, because we say that so many times because it's like the most popular. Everybody wants to criticize drug addicts, but at the same time, most of us spend our time either watching TV or on the internet, which by definition is still an addiction. So all I'm saying is we need to look ourselves in the mirror before we start pointing fingers at others.
And that's a very good point. Again, on that note, we encourage you to keep the conversation going by interacting with us on Twitter or by sharing our programs from our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube by looking up the subject CKXU, or you can interact with us on Twitter, send us a tweet or share one of our tweets, give us a mention, whatever you want to do. We're on Twitter. You can find us at the subject CKXU or by using hashtag #MoreThanTalkRadio. Send us an email if you'd like, the subject ckxu@gmail.com. There's lots of ways that you can interact with us, and just remember that our program is listener interactive, so you're welcome to call during our program as well. We'd like to thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Subject. We're glad to take the time to talk to you. On that note, we've reached the end of our program. We'll talk to you all next week.
Thank you.